Baby, don't mess around. Find a path to follow. Baby, don't mess around, mess around.
Tom, it's so good to sit down and have a chat with you finally. Just to give a little bit of context for the chat today, you and I have been speaking online for a little bit, and I've asked you to come and do a talk in Bellingen, which happened last night. It was a sensation. We'll get to that later. But first, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself because you got your fingers in so many pies.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so, well, my name's Tom. I'm by trade, I'm a holistic health practitioner. That was my original career. That changed to filmmaking and photography. And then once COVID came around, that changed to kind of educating and speaking out about the way the world works, which I've seen for a long time, but it's kind of never really was the right, I'd say things here and there, but never really got any traction or never really meant as much as it did when the world went a certain way. And then it became more important for people to hear more about their rights or how their bodies work in relation to the world so that they don't have to express the same kind of dis-ease as other people were.
It's really interesting because even though, you know, your claim to fame, whatever, was that first COVID video or medical related video, since then you have jumped off into all sorts of philosophical ideas about how to, you call it self-author, how to show up in the world, how to work with energies. Can you lead me back to the time and place where Tom learnt those philosophies, or was that a journey in itself? Because there are so many things that you talk about which are beyond just, you know, material, what everyday human might be moving through. Tell me where that started.
Yeah, that was a journey for sure. It wasn't something that was a specific moment. I mean, realistically, it's, you know, it's all the experiences led up towards getting that, but it really all dropped in around the same time that, you know, all the nonsense was going on in the world. That kind of really solidified a lot of what I led to. My experiences, my learnings, all kind of came together in that period, which I think really, because when you say it's more, there's a philosophical element to it, I guess I agree, but it's, when you look at what happens in the world, it's usually related to something else that's happening on a larger scale. So my understanding of an event like COVID, for example, is that that was a shift in the earth, like an age that was changing over, and then that gets hijacked by the people that sort of are the puppeteers for the world. So rather than wanting people to be able to, I guess, match that worldly event, like match a change of ages, which is essentially a chance for people to gain a different level of resonance, a different understanding of who they are, and a different way to relate to each other, to themselves, and to the earth. And they'll generally will hijack an event like that and then create this big show, which was COVID. So that brings people right into their minds and into their fear centers. So they will prevent them from really feeling what's actually going on. So it's like they'll always hijack and put this layer or filter in between us and what's happening in the, say, cosmology, if you want to call it that. And so if people are running around thinking that there's viruses flying around and they're scared of everyone or everything or the air, they're not going to tap into what's actually there for us to tap into, which is a chance for us to all level up. Yeah. But see, the thing is, that'll prevent a lot of people, but that's their choice. And then other people, it actually helps them. Actually gives them more of a sign that something's going on that they should be paying attention to. And so the lessons that I learned all kind of came together within the last 2 to 3 years to speak about what I speak about now.
Absolutely. So I guess things did reveal themselves to you more and more so as the split, as you said, in the world happened, because your language is so interesting. Like, you have had to, you know, when a teacher teaches English, they have to break down how they understand the language to then teach it. And it's like you've had to go internal to really break down your inner standings or understandings to be able to teach that. And one of the things you talk about is to never assume a position that's given to you. And that ties into everything, whether it's mainstream media that are assuming things about you, or the law or police, or even your health or whatever. this is something you've created and you've related it to jiu-jitsu and martial arts. But can you explain a little bit more about that statement that you should never assume a position that's given to you?
Do you mean like a label or?
Yeah, well, you spoke about it last night that you just said never assume positions given to you, hold your own position. And I just want you to elaborate on that. That's been one of your things you've said numerous times.
The way that I explain it is that life is all about these interactions. There's always an offer put forward, and then by the way you handle that offer, either you fully agree to it, you say yes and do it, or you negotiate, or you say, no, that's not what's going to happen here. An agreement is then formed either way. Either you're doing it or you're negotiating on how that's going to look, or you're not going to do it. That's the agreement, but it comes from an offer. So those that we assume have authority in the world are constantly putting out offers. And a lot of people assume that that's something that you have to do. Like a mandate, for example, people don't necessarily know what that word means. For a mandate to occur, there has to be a mandator and there has to be a mandatee, which is the one that the mandate is given to, but it's an offer. For that to occur, it actually requires the consent of the one being given that offer, which is what commercial agreements are all about. So offer, and then either an acceptance or a non-acceptance, which is negotiation. And then based on how that goes, there's an agreement. And once that agreement is formed, that's kind of how things are going to go. So because those are the ones that are always doing the offering, like go here, you're not allowed to go there, pay this fine, pay that tax, think this way, then they're the ones that are authoring because they're writing the script. They're like, this is how it's going to go. This is the offer that I'm giving to you. And by authoring, that's the first part of the word of authority. So that's why we assume that there are these things called authority figures in the world, or bodies of authority, like a government, for example. But the reality is that we give them that. That's an offer given to us. We agree to it and play it out, and we make them that. But they're not that by nature. That's like an agreement that's occurred, not from them, from us. And so the authoring becomes the authority, which is why I flip it, which is why we become the authors, then we become the authority in whatever it is, how we think, how we'll interact with each other, how we'll do business with each other or trade with each other, for example, and the value that we can exchange as a result. So when somebody's making an offer, that offer I call establishing a position. So if I were to ask you to do something, I might just say, hey, can you stop the recording now? You don't have to, and it's obviously phrased as a question. But I'm the one that's authoring. I'm like, this is what's I'm putting out that should occur. The recording stops, for example. And it's a position. So the stopping of the recording is the position. So I've established what's going to occur or what I want to occur. Based on how you handle that, it'll either occur or it won't, or you'll say, well, I'll stop it, but in 20 minutes. That would be a negotiation. But if I really, really want that to happen, I have to hold the position that I established. And that's the art of negotiating. Like people are familiar with that with things like sales, with wanting to make friends or like relationships or whatever. It's like there's always these negotiations that occur. So it's establishing and then holding a position, and the holding is the key that is most people find that is the biggest learning curve.
Yeah. So it's really, I would say, safe to say, easy to grasp when you put it in the context of like, can you stop that recording? And I guess people, fear comes up or confusion comes up when the scenario has more at stake. So, for example, you and Dave Strong have created this amazing Living Free platform where you talk about a lot of these things, and it's broken up into different sections. For anyone that doesn't know, there's lawful me, heal me, grow me, spirit me, and soon business me, I think.
Yep.
But in the lawful me, to tie into what we're talking about, there's been a lot about the digital ID that is supposed to be hitting Australia. It's already, in other countries. This is something where we could apply what you're talking about as a collective. Is that correct? So there's going to be an offer of a digital ID, and you're saying that silence is actually not the right answer.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you dive in a bit
silence
more?
is a form of consent. It's called assent, which is an unconscious decision to agree. So basically, if you remain silent on something, it technically means by default you have nothing to say. And if you've got nothing to say, I can make the assumption that you agree. That's the way that the legal processes work. That's the way commerce works, but it's based on natural law. But we need to give people always 3 opportunities to respond, not just one. So if I ask you something and you remain silent, just by doing it once doesn't form an agreement. But it's just a natural law, and that filters its way into the legal system that we have. So if you get offered a director's ID and you remain silent, not a big deal. Twice, you're starting to skate on thin ice. 3 times, you fail and you'll form an agreement. You don't have the right then to come back and say, no, I didn't want to do that.
Yes.
You've already formed the agreement through silence.
So some people listening might not even be aware of this director's ID. Can you just summarize why it is something we do need to not assume the position for and how it would affect our life?
Yeah, well, look, the thing is it's part of a totalitarian regime. So it's part of wanting to make a one world system and a social credit score where everything that you do will be watched and monitored. And if you say anything that doesn't go along the guidelines or the stream of what they put out, then you'll be punished, as in you'll be cut off from your benefits and privileges. But benefits and privileges are what are afforded to slaves in the first place. Like men and women, people who are living, people who stand on their own 2 feet have rights. We don't actually need benefits and privileges, but we're kind of tricked or duped into handing our rights in and agreeing that we are these slaves or wards of the state, and in return we accept benefits and privileges. Now that might sound kind of bad, like I don't want to be a slave, but the thing is if you're a good slave, you'll live a good life. Because if you look at what's happened throughout history, and especially like history's got this weird kind of whole game going on in itself. Like history literally means his story. So how you are fed the story will give you a perception of how things were. But if you look at the actual mechanics of slavery back when it was a legalized thing, if you were a good slave, you lived the exact same life as the slave masters. You ate the same food, slept in the same kind of quarters. We assume it means you were whipped and starved and worked to the bone, but it wasn't actually the case. It's just like the slaves and the slave masters, and then something actually good was created, like roads, buildings, and whatever. I'm not saying I agree with slavery,
No.
but it's just that if you were a good slave, you were treated well. You lived a good life. But the thing is, if you're a bad slave and you went against things, that's when the whips came out, or that's when the punishments were dealt out. So it parlays to modern society, because if you accept all of these offers and you sign up for your ID, because you have to sign up for it, no one forces it on you. They threaten you, as in you'll get a massive fine if you don't, but that's an empty threat in most cases. Even if it's not empty, it's still an offer. It's something to be negotiated on, handled, and you just handle your business well, and it's fine. But the purpose of it is so that they can just keep casting this net and then tighten it, so that they'll monitor everything you do, every dollar that comes in and goes out. So they can tap more of that. You don't have as much freedom to deal in cash, for example. If you do anything that's like, let's say they roll out more mandates and you don't comply with those, now they'll take away your benefits and privileges, which in that context is your right. You think it's a right, but it's a benefit or a privilege to conduct business, and they'll take that away. So therefore people are put into a fear trap, because they're like, well, I don't want my business taken away. So that makes them more of a slave, more likely to comply, more likely to turn a blind eye or bend over to do whatever they're told. So that's the intent with it. Why it's important is just to realize that there's nothing wrong with not going along with it. Some people in life are just meant to be good slaves. There's actually nothing wrong with it. You're not worse than somebody who's like a warrior who goes out to, stand on their own 2 feet. It's just we all have a different path. But if you're not one of those people and you don't like the idea of being told what to do, then you don't have to. That's the thing. But you do need to know who you are. You can't just throw your arms up and go, this isn't fair and you guys suck and you can't do this and I'm not going to do that and I'm a free man and whatever. It's just those words are all empty, and you're actually binding more to that offer. So just learning about how agreements are formed, how consent works, and then how to either put in counter offers or voice your non-consent in a way that is correct. And by correct, I mean it's legally correct, whereby if you wanted to take it to a court, you would have a good standing. And it's correct in as far as you're standing here on earth under natural law. You're not being dishonorable by calling people names or just shoving offers back in their face and telling, angrily that you're not going to do it. That actually doesn't achieve what you would think you want it to achieve.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting topic to just ground into, because it is current. And, you're a perfect example. You've created this platform which is outside of the Instagram, of the Facebook, where people's businesses are tied up in now. And that is, you know, again, I'll reiterate, whoever doesn't know what a digital ID, a director's ID in is, our data from the internet going over, and you need certain types of points to be able to continue to use the internet in certain types of ways. So this is, of course, a big threat to people's livelihood. And so following a path like you have, which is bold and trailblazing and creating your own platform and speaking out, yeah, it's where do they begin? Let's say something does get passed and someone says, okay, my entire life is, you know, based on Instagram. I have all my income from that, you know. Would you just say that is a moment of, you know, greater truth and you need to completely start again? Or do they come and join your platform? Like, what do people find community like-minded?
A great question, yeah.
What do you do? Because it's easy to be like, yeah, just stand up. But it's like, okay, this is supposed to come in midway this year. You know, Dan Andrews, I've heard down in Melbourne, is making agreements with Facebook to start researching about, what's something.
Of course he is.
What's something practical?
Ushering in the Chinese Revolution.
What's something practical?
Okay, so there's a few different elements to this. The first one, let me just explain. I'll get into what I would do if I'm in that situation.
Yes, that's a good
But
one.
I'll just firstly explain the difference between public and private for those that don't know. Most people are completely unaware of this world called the private. The private is the original system. It's what's set up for us to flourish, to live long, to prosper, to be fruitful and multiply. It's designed for us. It's designed for living men and women to flourish. The system is actually designed for us. At some point along the way, it was hijacked and there was a mirror image opposite of the system as it is that was set up. And that correlates to absolutely everything, which I'll explain a bit about. But what it is called the public. And the public is the world of entities.
Corporate bodies,
corporate fiction. So, for example, Australia, sometime around the 70s, went from being Australia to the Commonwealth of Australia, which is different to the Commonwealth, and that's a corporate entity that's registered in the United States. And our names, we were started to be given birth certificates. That registers us as an entity in a trust, and it makes us corporate fiction. So it doesn't make us corporate fiction just because they started registering these things. We make us by our agreement. And the way we agree is by agreeing that we're an entity. And the way we do that is by saying, yes, I am Tom Barnett, or I am a driver, I am a person. All of those things are statutory terms. Your name is a statutory entity, much like, say, the name of the radio station or the name of Bellingen. Like, these are all corporate entities. So is Tom Barnett. That's a corporate entity. That's not me. So when you say something like, somebody asks a question, is your name Bob Smith? And you say yes, what you're really doing is you're agreeing that you are a name. Because that's the thing. Like, if you actually break down what's being asked, are you Bob Smith? Not do you answer to Bob Smith, or is your name Bob Smith? Listen to the language. Are you Bob Smith? So if you say yes, you're saying, yes, I am Bob Smith. What is Bob Smith? Bob Smith is a name. What's a name? A name is a corporate fiction, an entity, a registered trust, or a registered fiction or corporation. So you're saying you are that. And if you are that, then you come under the ruling of everything statutory, which is every act in the country. The Biosecurity Act, or the Crimes Act, or the whatever act. All acts. Acts regulate corporations. They don't regulate people. So by our agreement, this is the agreement that's formed, is we say we're a driver, that's an entity. A resident, that's an entity. A name, that's an entity. They're all entities. And so this is how we put ourselves willingly, by consent, into this public system that's ruled by that. And so the public system is ruled by all these corporate laws. So whoever made Facebook, so there's an Instagram, so there's a maxim of law that says what you create, you own. They own that. They own that system and that infrastructure, which means if they want to change the rules about how you participate within that structure, that's up to them. They can. They have every right to. And so if that means, well, you're not actually allowed to say certain things, or you're not actually allowed to promote certain things, or we'll ban you, they can do that. You don't have any right to fight that, because the rules and regulations are clear. By partaking in the platform, you agree to those rules and regulations. And if you break them, too bad, you're off. So there's this whole world of the private, though, which is not regulated by taxation, not regulated by authoritative, in inverted commas, bodies like APRA or the TGA or any kind of authority or association that regulates like the radio industry or the health industry or the footwear industry. Because when you register, which you never have to do, that's an offer. When you apply, it means you beg to register to an entity that controls you, controls what you can and can't do and what you can and can't say. So there's a key difference here as well, which is really important between public and private. And the public is also the world of insurances. And insurances really were put in to cover up for people's ineptitude or inaccuracies or they're just not really, I don't want to say, I want to choose my words kind of carefully, but but just, they're not really that competent really. Because people assume that things like accidents happen and whatever. Anyway, insurance is another topic, but that just relates to that world. Since I was young, I've always operated in the private. I kind of figured it out earlier. I didn't know exactly what it was. I didn't know the mechanics the way I do now, but I just knew it was like, this is the right way to go. I just knew that if I had something to offer you, whether it was a product or a service or whatever, and you wanted what I had, why did I need a third party to intervene?
Of course.
Right? Because what most people do when they're new to this, they assume that we need the protection of insurance. How can we possibly interact without the safety and security of insurance? But what they're doing is they're outsourcing where safety and security comes from. They don't realize it comes inherently just from being alive and being put here on earth, and also in ourselves. Like, I'm my insurance. I'm my resume. I'm all these things that I don't partake in because I don't like that system. So what also happens is that by us having a two-party agreement, because there's no agreements between third parties. That's why if there is a third party, it's called a third-party interloper. That's your regulating bodies, your insurance companies and whatever. It actually breaks the agreement that you and I would naturally have. So I like to just keep it between two parties, which is what forms a pure agreement, and including what would happen if things maybe didn't go right. But then this is the major key, is that means I and you take full responsibility for what we create in that interaction. We don't need a third party. So that's getting to a higher level than you can ever get within that public system. So then let me now get to what I would do if I was one of these people.
And ground back down into, because the internet is a third party.
It is.
And you use it and I use it, and this is going to be on the internet. And we've had this global boom where we're all connected. So to bring it down to just you and I wouldn't be here unless for the internet.
Yeah.
So what do we do if these systems, these third-party systems, get taken away drastically?
So what they are, though, is that you've kind of hit on a good topic there, because they are systems, and there's systems within systems, much like there is a public and a private that mirror each other. And so what you're kind of getting at is what happens about the Instagram and the Facebook and whatever. The internet itself is neither public nor private. It's just an infrastructure, and you make it public or private depending on how you use it. So what I would do if I was one of these people who's like, what, public, private, entities, what? Doesn't really get it, and they rely on Instagram for their business, I'm like, that's fine. Just be aware of what you're going into, but you've got to choose. You got to have an exit strategy, or you've got to be very, very smart about how you use it and see it as a tool. But one of my favorite people is Owen Benjamin. He's a comedian in the States, and he's got this whole network called, they're called the Bears, and they have a Beartaria network. And their whole slogan during the whole lockdown period was, people were saying, do not comply. But they switched it and they said, instead of saying do not comply, they said do not rely. And the fear comes when we're reliant on these systems, but we don't have to be, because there's so many other ways, and we only limit ourselves in how we can do business or interact with each other or trade. So what I would suggest is, if this is new to you, just have like, I'm either going to be a willingly good slave, and there's nothing wrong with that, or I'm going to have...
You've already woken someone up by saying that.
Or I'm going to be... I can see that there's greener pastures and I want to get there, but obviously as an individual, this is new to me and I'm not there yet, but that's where I'm going to go. So much like, say, wanting to go to Hawaii but having no money, you'll be like, all right, I'll get there in 2 years. I'll have to do these jobs, save this amount of money, get my skin ready for like better sun if you're a whitey from somewhere that doesn't get sun. You would prepare to get there. And it would be a journey, but you'd have this exit strategy or a destination. So I would say, if I put myself in that position, I'm like, all right, I know that for the next, say, year or two, there's certain things I might not be able to say. But what I can do is I can be very intelligent about how I put a message across. Let's say there are guidelines for, say, YouTube, right? Like I got kicked off YouTube ages ago. If I could go back and do it again, I wouldn't say words. I don't know. What words can we say on this station or not? Is there anything I'm not allowed to say?
This is going on YouTube.
Yeah. Well.
So practice what you would say.
Okay. So, all right. So let's say that there's a V word that rhymes with Miley Cyrus, right?
Yeah.
I would just use Miley Cyrus. I would, it's kind of like I'm alluding to something. You know what word I'm really saying, right?
Yeah.
But no one can ban me. No one can report me because I'm not saying that word that rhymes with Miley Cyrus. So I could say whatever I want, but I would just be dancing around topics and I would be intelligent. Only somebody who just is hell bent on fighting stuff, which never works. The analogy for this, for example, was when they shut the border at the Gold Coast. I actually never saw that coming. But so many people were like, they go, teach us how to handle the cops and that at the border. And I'm like, well, probably wouldn't, but this is what you would do. Like, this is the law. This is how you establish and hold a position. Of course, they don't know how to do that. They're just angry and they have to fight whatever's in front of them. So they go directly at what's set up. And I'm like, if I was running the show, I would do exactly that because I know people are going to run into that trap. Reality is 100 meters to the left. You could just go around it. So I'm like, do you need to... But people feel this need to go right at it. And so people get their back up about guidelines and they're like, screw you, YouTube, I'm saying. And it's like, well, don't complain when you get deleted.
That feels very martial arty as well.
It is. It's everything's about that. And so it's about, do you really need to fight it? And then if so, why? Why do you feel that's an affront to you? It's just a tool. No one's forcing you to use it. It's not the only thing either.
Yeah.
And what you can do is while you're setting yourself up in the private, you can start filtering from the public and putting into the private. So that's like, for example, if you're earning a wage, you could set up a private trust or something and start filtering your earnings into that. If you are still on Instagram and things, as I still am, I'll filter that to, say, Telegram, which is a bit better than Instagram. And ideally, of course, to my own website, which is on private servers. So even if people complain, my website's on private servers. So no one's going to cancel that because the internet is just a structure. It's just a system. So again, it's how do you use that? What's set up privately and what's set up publicly? My Instagram channel is absolutely a public thing and whoever Instagram is owns that. I'm not going to complain if they delete me. It's very clear what I can and can't say on my channels if I want to. I'm really shadow banned, yeah, then I've got my website, which is not shadow banned. So that's how I would do it if I was new to it.
Very interesting. Have you had a lot of run-ins with the police yourself? Because you say you say that a lot of people ask you, what do I do if I meet the cops? So is that how you learned?
Yeah, I learned everything from experience. And the reason that I'm somebody that people go, hey, can you teach us how to do stuff? I don't consider myself, especially with this, it's really, I'm not willing to like teach it. And that's why I don't market myself as teaching, because it is like giving someone a loaded weapon or teaching them martial arts. It's like there's a certain responsibility that comes with it and a certain level of like knowingness that you can really hurt yourself with it. So it's not something that I teach and I want people to go out and but see, the difference between me and a lot of other people, or let's just say people like me, Zev, Dave, other people that do this, Nick Patterson, for example, is a great example, is that we were willing to put ourselves in the positions that most people fear. So most people want to be taught this because they're like, just tell me what to say so I don't have to deal with A, B, and C implications or experiences. They fear the experience. Whereas me, Nick Patterson, Darren Dixon, Dave Armstrong on the platform, we never shied away from the experience. We're like, let's just have the experience. And by doing that, you actually burst fear bubbles and you level up in your resonance and your ability to really get to know a situation, because you can't learn it just from, learning the script or learning what you're supposed to say to police. Because the first thing, especially because I've known several police, is that if you don't pass the attitude test, it doesn't matter how good your gab is, you're still going to get a knee in the back or a fine or spend a night in a cell. If you pass the attitude test, you actually don't need to know any of the law stuff. And it's the same thing. People they don't get the simplicity of situations. You're just dealing with a man or a woman. And if you don't treat them like that, you're going to get treated badly in return. It doesn't matter how good your knowledge is on laws and whatever.
Can you give me an example of a scenario you've been in?
Yeah, for sure. So I've never really had a bad interaction with cops. The worst interactions I've had are ones that I lost, but they still weren't bad. I ended up shaking the guy's hands afterwards, and that just didn't go my way. But it's like same as competing in my first martial arts matches. I didn't win them all, and I'd still shake my opponent's hand, and I would like learn more from that. So, for example, I can give you several. Okay, so earlier on, before I really knew what to say, I just kind of had this knowing that, look, they don't really have authority. And I wouldn't just assume that an interaction would go the way it would go. Little bit of context to this is that I grew up like quite rebellious and not just accepting what I was told. Like I've always questioned things. So I never really assumed that an interaction should go the way that you're shown on movies or that people tell you a police interaction would go. So if I was riding my bike on the Gold Coast, they were real Nazis about not wearing helmets. And a few times I would get bailed up by police. They'd be quite aggressive in the way they'd pull over and like jam you in and lights on and that. I'm like, that's a bit ridiculous for like, it's not like I'm a bank robber trying to flee a scene, right? So instead of just going head to head, I'm like, what can I do in this situation? And I would just play a character. One of my favorites was Autism Boy. And I kind of know that character because I'm quite a well-functioning autistic. And so I would just play that role. Like I don't even really know what's going on. I don't really know how to talk properly. I'm like going off on weird monologues about nothing, like trying not to laugh because I'm like, this is hilarious. This is great. And the guys just realized they're like, there's no polarity here I can work with. I can't infiltrate him to make him feel small. He's not trying to infiltrate us to make us feel small or win. There's no battle. I'm just like completely deflecting and diffusing to create nothing. Nothing can be created from that. So I would call that Autism Boy, and I'd just be telling stories about a sister I don't have as to why my helmet's missing. I think it's hers and it's pink. No, maybe it's got a lightning strike on it. And like they don't know how to handle that because they are used to a certain interaction. They're used to a certain parameter of what people will do and what people will say. And if you operate outside of that parameters, they don't know how to function. So then they just like lose interest. And in cars, for example, what I see a lot of is when people say things like, I'm a man or I'm a woman and I'm sovereign and you don't have any rights here. This is our land and you're a foreign occupation. Those things are all technically true, but unless you have a real understanding, meaning that you know who you are, that's all just like hot air. And all they're doing is just like counting the seconds until you give up or you realize you're not going to get anywhere, and then they'll just give you a fine anyway or arrest you or whatever. I've seen it so many times. And I've seen people have their windows broken and dragged out of cars because they just weren't going to answer questions in the way that it was wanted. You don't have to answer questions, but again, it's how do you do that? You know, it's like a martial art. How do you actually use a technique or how do you implement it? It's like different from just knowing it or, you know, what it can do. So for example, one of the times that it didn't go well, I'll tell you one of the times it went well and then didn't go well in the same situation. Both were for driving an unregistered car, unlicensed. The reason I did that was because I didn't vote for several years because I was like, why would I? But I also I didn't know when there was elections on. No one told me I had fines. They just ended up racking up to the point where my license was cancelled. No one told me that either. So I went into the DMV to re-register my car or renew my license or whatever. And they're like, oh, no, you can't. You got a suspension on it. And I'm like, since when? And they're like, oh, it's been suspended for over a year. And I'm like, no one's ever told me. And they go, yeah, well, sorry, we can't help you. I'm like, are you telling me you're not going to accept my money? You're not going to accept my money and renew my license? They're like, no. And I'm like, my mind just snapped. I was like, well, screw you guys then. It doesn't matter. If you don't want my money, I'm not registering my car. So I went straight to the library and I printed off my own driver's license. I laminated it there in the library. I went on eBay and I ordered my own license plates. I got 46 and 2 because after the Tool song. Yeah. And and I did write notices to the police commissioner, the transport department, and I think the prime minister. I'm not sure, but definitely the first two. I didn't know how to write a notice. I wrote it as an affidavit, spelled affidavit wrong, did everything wrong, but at least my intent was clear, right? And I thought that was it. I was like, I've sent it off. I sent it once, no 3 notices or anything. I started driving around. People are like, I get people hanging out the windows just going, yeah, like, because they'd see my plate and stuff. I drove around first before that on a scooter for a year and a half, no license, no registration. And then in that car, I drove unlicensed, unregistered for 3 years. And in that time, I got pulled over I can't remember, it was 6 or 7 times. Now, the first interactions were, the very first one was me going through a random breath test in Palm Beach. Just this guy was on 19th Ave, just randomly pulling. He was on his own. And when you're dealing with police on their own, it's different to dealing with police when there's multiple, okay? So this guy was on his own. He just goes, he kind of like looks at my plate weird as he comes up to the window and he goes, you got a license there? And I'm like, yeah, sure. This is before I knew what I do and don't have to do. This is me just like figuring it out for myself. So I grab my license and I give it to him. This is my laminated license. So I give it to him and he's kind of like looking at me weird. He's just like, mate, what's this? It's my license. What do you mean, what's this? He goes, do you have a driver's license? And I go, you're holding it. And he's, like, he was kind of like, almost like, is this guy for real? Because I'm just being very like, you are holding my license. Why are you asking me if I have a license? That's a dumb question. You're holding it. It's like, think about the definitions of the words. That's a license and it's mine. Therefore, that's my license. Why are you asking me? But I wasn't being narky. I was just like, yeah, that's my license. He goes, what's your name? I'm like, it's Tom. Like, I didn't know about not answering questions or asking questions first and whatever. He just goes, so he goes, so those plates, they're not Queensland plates, are they? So, well, they're mine and it says Queensland on it. And anyway, he goes, I don't know really what to do with you. You can't, he goes, do you have a real license? And I went, I've already answered that question. And I said, here you go. And I pulled the notices, the copies of the notices and the affidavits, and I gave them to him. This guy was really polite, really nice. He went to his car for about 5 or 10 minutes, read through every word on it, which a lot of police won't do, read through all of it. And he comes back and he just goes, look, I'm a police officer, right? And I've got to do my job. I get it. Like, I get what you're doing, but unfortunately the world doesn't work that way. Honestly, this guy was trying his best to get me off the hook. He really was. And he was a lovely guy because I wasn't fighting him. I wasn't like, you pig, you this. Like, if I treated him well and I passed the attitude test, then why would I treat him badly? He's just another guy. He's not better than me. He's not worse than me. So I just treat him like that. And so we get down to it and he's just like, he goes, look, I can see you're not doing anything wrong. You're not drunk. You're not using your phone. But it's like, mate, the world doesn't work like this. He's just giving me this speech. And I'm like, well, I think it does. So then he said, well, I've got to give you a fine. And I said, I don't consent to that. At least I didn't even know that was a thing, but I just knew it without learning it. I knew it. And I was like, I don't consent to that. And he goes, oh, all right. You don't consent to that. Okay. So he starts to get a bit deflated, not angry, just damn it. Like, I kind of got him on that one. And I saw his reaction. I was like, oh, I just did something then, because he just kind of like backed off. So then I wasn't going to give him my address or anything. I go, I got a PO box. And he goes, I'm not going to give you a fine. Can I send you it in the mail? You don't have to pay it. Like, you do whatever you want after, but I've got to do my job as an offer. Is that okay? And I said, that sounds fair. Like, we formed an agreement. I didn't know I didn't have to at the time, but I was like, that's fair. So he treated me really well. And he goes, look, if you've got any evidence that this wouldn't apply to you, trying to help me out, he goes, just write me a letter and we'll see what we can do. So he gives me his address and his name and everything, like not home address, but his police address. And I write him a letter and I just said, look, this is how it is. I don't really want to give you any other information. I told you said you wish the world wasn't like this. You've got an opportunity right here and now to make the world not that. You know, I'm not doing anything wrong. You know that this is like not really the right thing. And anyway, he didn't write back, but but he was trying to affix it to an entity that's not registered. So I was like, that's not even in my name anyway. And he sent it to my PO box, which anyway.
So is your car registered at the moment?
Now it is, yeah. And I'll get to why. Yeah. So I had several interactions like that with them not really knowing what to do with me. And because I wasn't fighting them in any way, they didn't have anything to grab onto, like, okay, we can arrest you for that, or even though technically. So again, I can't remember exactly how many times, but there was this guy in Byron who pulled me up. I was actually parked at Belongil at the beach. He'd gone past and then he went past again. This was during Splendor time. So they're doing like their drug patrols and stuff. He kind of went past and then he like stops and then backs up. I'm just getting out of my car with some lunch. And he just goes, how you going, mate? He goes, are those real plates? And I'm like, yeah. Well, it's a real plate, isn't it? Like, it's a plate, it's real. So I'm like, yeah, it's a real plate. These are the 46 and 2 plates. He just goes, what do you mean? He goes, oh, so it's not a real plate. And then he starts getting a bit angry, like a bit narky. So he's trying to tell me he needs my license and that. And I'm like, I gave him my fake one. And he's like, he thinks I'm lying. Like, that couldn't be my real name. That couldn't be my real date of birth or anything. Because I put it all on the license. And it gets to the point where I did identify myself with a passport, because he's saying, I'm going to arrest you unless you can identify yourself. I'm taking you down to the station. I'm like, I can't be bothered doing that. Here's my passport. And he realizes that everything I told him was true. I wasn't lying about anything. And his tone kind of changed. He's like, oh, this guy's actually, he didn't get me at first. So then he goes, well, I go, mate, I've already been pulled over like 5 or 6 times. They give me fines. I'm not going to pay him. I didn't know anything about refusal of contracts or anything back then. But he said, well, I've got to take those plates off your car. He goes, you must have been putting them back on. I go, no one's taken them off before. He goes, well, they should have. And I'm like, well, they didn't. So anyway, and then I go, I don't give you permission for that. You don't have the jurisdiction to do this. And he was getting a bit angry. Anyway, I went back and forth. But at the end of the day, he ended up shaking my hand. He's like, he just goes, got nothing against you. But this is how you got to go to court now. And I was quite happy to do that, because it was going to be my first appearance in a courtroom to defend myself against like a criminal charge like that. And I went to court to do the mention, didn't know what a mention was. I was, of course, going to plead not guilty. The magistrate was trying to help me out. A man, about 50 years old, he was very polite and nice. He was looking at me. He goes, these are the charges. I didn't know they're supposed to read out every charge. So I heard one of them. I go, yeah, not guilty. And he has to read them all out, otherwise they don't go on the record. I don't know that. I'm trying to interrupt him. I go, yeah, not guilty. Like, just don't worry, it's not guilty. I'll do that. So then he's looking at me. He goes, do you have any evidence for... He's kind of like, hey, do you know what you're doing? Like, he's really trying to help me out. And I'm like, yeah. Like, I was really ignorantly confident. I thought I knew exactly what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. So then he goes, all right, I'll set a hearing for 2 weeks. Is that all right? I went, it's fine. He goes, great, I'll see you then. Like, he was really polite. And then the cop rings me and he goes, you pled not guilty for that mention. I go, yeah, of course. Yeah, I didn't do anything wrong. He goes, yeah, but that's not how the law works. He goes, if you plead not guilty with no evidence to what I've given you a charge for, you're gonna get wrapped over the knuckles. He said, you've got to plead guilty and then just give him the reasons why you did it. This is how the court system works. And he's like, you don't have to trust me. I know like I'm a police officer and that, but I'm telling you that you're going about it the wrong way if you're pleading not guilty. And I just picked up on it. I was just like, he's actually helping me out. Like, I actually trust what he's saying. So I changed the plea next time I went in. And instead of around, I can never remember the exact number, somewhere between $3,500 and $5,500 worth of fines for unregistered driving, unlicensed, uninsured motor vehicle, and displaying false plates. It was somewhere around, let's call it $4,000. At the end of that session, with knowing nothing about what I know now, I got a $150 fine for no insurance. Every other charge was dropped, and no charge or monetary penalty on anything else. This lady magistrate and I'm like, wow, this system is just like, as long as you're just talking to somebody like they're a human being, it's really like not what you think it is. And then I went in another time for unlicensed driving, because I went back into like, screw this. And they couldn't do anything to me, because I knew how to go through a non-consent. I knew how not to contract. I knew how not to be the name. I knew all these things that I know now. And it's like, I don't do it willingly, because we're going to get to why I registered my car now. Yeah. Because the thing is that I did it, and I did it. Like, I proved it to myself. But what happens is, once they're like, that guy, that's one of those guys, one of those sovereign citizen guys or whatever, you get targeted. And at the end of the day, I stopped fighting the system when I realized that it was very fair. And it's like, it's just fair. Like, these are the rules of the game. And the thing is, if it wasn't police and magistrates in courtrooms, if there was a lawless land, you'd have pirates, you'd have the toughest guys in every neighborhood. You'd have to pay $20 every time you want to cross the bridge to Bella, to the river. Exactly. There'd be no one would stop some guys there pirating every street corner, every interaction, racketeering like the mafia. Every business, you have to pay protection money, or otherwise you get bashed or your premises gets burnt down. Who's going to stop that, right? So So this is the thing. I'm like, this is based on the rules of the jungle. And in the jungle, the only rule is you got to know who you are. If you're not a silverback gorilla, if you're not the toughest guy in the jungle, don't pretend you are. Don't think you have the right to go everywhere and eat everyone's bananas, because you'll get your head pulled off your body and eaten ceremonially by that actual silverback. So that's just how life works. So getting to know who you are is actual freedom as well. So I stopped fighting the system. I'm like, it's just a racketeering scam. I know it, but it's just the game. So instead of having a polarity with it, I'm just like, I'll just pay my registration and my licensing costs so that I can just drive to the beach without getting harassed by somebody who's literally a land pirate. And it was just a way to reframe it. And now I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah, and it keeps so many people in check anyway, because regoing your car is also just making sure it's, relatively safe. Of course, there's extremes and we're like, my car's fine, I don't need to pay for this. But if there wasn't that, there would be people literally probably driving around with 3 wheels, and then you're causing danger for other people.
Yeah, unfortunately that's very true with society. So for me though, I service my car always. I'd get yearly checks on it even though I didn't have to. I still get, do you know what I mean? So like
you had the self-reliance.
Yeah,
but
I have self-reliance and responsibility.
People don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't do that. Oh, thank you for sharing that. It was an epic journey. And, it leads me to my next question quite beautifully, because you're a paradox, right? Like, you're super knowledgeable. You've got book smarts, you've got all this legal system that you're across now. But then one of your common threads as well is don't listen to the narrative. Like, I remember watching some of your videos and you were saying how you don't follow what's happening next, what's coming onto the news, whatever's happening. You even left a relationship because the woman was saying, we need to prepare and get food and buy diesel or whatever. So you're always saying, tune out of that and focus on your inner authoring. But at the same time, you are so across everything. So how do you deal with that duality, and how is other people supposed to,
Well, this is the thing, is because information is just that. We're exposed to all kinds of information all the time. Radio waves, light waves, frequencies of all kind that are all encoded with information. And when you are in sync with that, you're getting the information. So, for example, most of what people hear in the quote unquote truth movement is it's all how you're going to die next. What's going to happen tomorrow that's going to prevent you from like going to the shops and having a coffee or living whatever fake life that you currently live. So then it's like, but why? Why do you just take that information? That's an offer. And how do you know that that's not a way to try to corral you into making that happen, for example? Because one of the reasons that I don't read books or go on the internet is because I get information from a higher source. So the more you use, say, a phone to like Google stuff and try to figure things out, the less you'll actually develop your ability to tap into the truer information source. So when people say things like, in October, the financial system's going to crash, we're going to run out of fuel, we've got to stockpile it now, because they're listening to people telling them that, I'm just tuning into like the grids that are below us and above us. And I'm like, they're not telling me that. They're telling me the opposite of that. And so that's how I kind of can be across what's actually happening without reading books or listening to people's opinions on the internet or whatever.
But in saying that, we live in a country that is relatively affluent, and it gives the space for that. It gives you the space to be peaceful, to connect to yourself, to tap into that higher power. Like, if you're in a war-torn country, that's not your doing. Like, maybe in some way, you've participated, but you're checking your news sources daily. Like, do you think it's because you've lived in Australia that you've been able to be given the space to be able to get information the way you do now?
No, it's because I was traumatized so heavily. I was broken out of the system. I didn't choose to exit it. And I'd actually say, because I know people that live in, I've known people that lived in like Croatia, Sarajevo, Afghanistan. I've known people that lived in places that are experiencing that, and they're exactly what I was doing as well. Because I think the harder something gets, the greater the opportunity, or the clearer the opportunity to actually do that. It's quite often it's the comfort that keeps you in it. Because you know how you say we live in Australia and it's relatively affluent. Well, I was never affluent. I was homeless for like 3 years on and off.
As a child?
No,
in
my 20s. Yeah. And but throughout childhood, I just never, like I said in the talk last night, like physically I was cared for. as in I had food, water, and shelter. But mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, I had to fend for myself, and I brought myself up. It's really difficult. So it's kind of like I learned to find these other sources through the hardships, not through like, you know, a golden ticket and sitting on the beach in sunshine and meditation. So yeah, it actually did come through harder things. But also, this is the other thing, like, I got to make it clear that we're all really, really different and have really different paths, and not everybody maybe even has the capacity to do that. I'm not sure. I think we all do because of our nature, like what we really are. But I also know that some of us have varying capacities to do lots of different things. Like, I would love to be able to sing. Everyone can sing, for example, as in you can make a tone at the right pitch, but whether it's nice to listen to or not is a whole other thing. Some people are just great singers. Other people just sound pretty horrible. And like picking up an instrument. Like I learned instruments, I learned them relatively easy. For some reason, music's just kind of there. I can figure it out. I can play by ear. Whereas other people might have to take lessons for 5 or 10 years and still not be able to do that. But they can do something else really, really well that I can't do, you know? So it's kind of like when I say that I get information from those sources, I'm not suggesting that that's what everybody
should do.
Right. As well, yeah. It's
but
just
you
like,
kind of are, because you're saying we should inner author and write our own story and just not buy into what's going on. But if people don't, like, I can't sit there and download what I feel like is going to happen this year. You know, I have my spiritual connection, but I can't get precise information. Like
I don't think it's precise either. That's the thing. Like, I don't pretend that I'm an oracle or a seer or anything like that. I just, it's more for me. I know what it's going to be like for me.
Yes.
Rather than for everybody else. Because there will be shortages for a lot of people, but it's because of what they're reliant on as well. It's like they haven't, and this is a journey too, you know, like I said at the start, it wasn't like I just got to this day that I can name and then things just changed for me and I was authoring. It's a constantly evolving journey. And what it really comes down to is the choices. It's like, as I was choosing to really have to put the effort in to source the food and water that I knew that I had needed for me. And then it's like, well, I can't just get takeaway, or I'm not going to go eat at that restaurant, even though that would be convenient and fun. And it's just like these little things, and they're called sacrifices. And the paradox of a sacrifice, or the illusion, is that most of the time it's actually something you gain rather than you give up. It's you're giving up an idea of something, but what you actually gain is greater wealth or greater autonomy or greater spiritual connection. And it's all in the giving up, because what we grow up in is like a very, very tightly structured and packaged, very small box. But there's like, it's like the lands that we have. There's other lands. There's nothing stopping you. You're told you can't go. You're told there's no other lands. You're told that it's like this. There's nothing stopping you, and nothing stopping you unplugging and sacrificing to get a greater level of awareness about things for yourself. I can't say what's going to happen for people in India or people down the road, but I just do know what's going to happen for me, because I realized a while ago, through all the pain and the loss that I went through, was that I get to choose how I get to choose. If somebody says a word that I might be offended by, I get to choose that. If somebody, like, you know, doesn't want me around, I get to choose whether I'm around. Like, I get to choose. And the more I got to realize I get to choose, that applies to everything. Lockdowns, wearing masks, or saying that they're going to change the financial system or take it away, or social credits or whatever. I'm like, I get to choose. That's why I don't care. But not everybody.
No.
So it's just kind of one of those things where we are where we are, and that journey is individual for everybody. So I kind of like to make that clear, that when I say things like, you don't have to give your name or address to a police officer, you don't have to listen to what's going on in the mainstream media. It's like, you don't, but that doesn't mean for everybody. Last thing I'll say before you go on, because it's a really key point. I say this to a few people. When I got kind of like thrust into the limelight through COVID, and people wanted to know, like, they knew in their head that they don't have to wear masks, or they don't have to stay in the house or whatever, but it's not an inner knowing yet. It's just a head knowing. So they're desperate for information. They're like, what do we need to know to not wear a mask? How do we handle a cop? How do we handle society? Okay. But for me, it's too little too late. It's like you've been dropped into a cage in an MMA match, and it's like, now fight. And they're like, how do I do or move? And it's like, too little too late.
Should have been training.
Too little too late. Exactly. Like, I've been training for this for like 20 years. So then the thing is, what I say about this is that you don't have to wear a mask, but that doesn't mean you don't have to wear a mask. Do you know what I mean? Like, just because technically you don't have to wear a mask, it doesn't mean that you have the right to not wear a mask, because that's not who you are yet. You're an angry person who doesn't know how to handle themselves or stand on their own 2 feet. Maybe you're actually better off putting on a mask.
Maybe not ready.
You're just not ready to deal with the world in what that means to walk around without a mask. Now, I'm not saying that you should wear a mask either. I'm just saying you got to come back to yourself. It's not, the world is not against you. The world is the world. It's how you operate within that world. Yeah. So you're your own worst enemy. It's not the police. It's not the government or whatever.
Yeah. So this is a really cool place to, I think, jump into last night, because, there's 130, 140 people there and everyone was listening with great intent. But then you opened it up for questions, and my 84-year-old dad brought up this topic, and he was specifically focusing on the Julian Assange court case. And you could feel his stress in that moment of like, how do you balance these two things? How do you be in your own bubble and not read the news or whatever, while simultaneously fighting for something, the injustice, right? And, just listening to you speak just then, I think it is something that I need to remember and needs to be reiterated, that this is your path and it works for you, but you are not advocating for people to unplug and to stop doing things, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's like, if you're not ready, if you unplug from the system that you think holds you and brings you safety or security or whatever, because you haven't found that from another place, that could be a spiral. You spiral badly. So.
No, but I just mean from there's this quote that says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Mm-hmm. I just mean from a practical sense, like if your local council is doing some shit things, you're not saying to just tap out of what's going on around you.
No.
Right?
No. Exactly. So you got to, okay, so this is really important to define and put things in context.
Yes.
Because let's say they're trying to chop down a tree that is a sacred tree, right? You can't just go, oh, well, that's just the path of the tree and my path is just, this is what my issue with, for example, before I say this, I'm not against anything or anyone's beliefs or anything. Most things have been infiltrated, and the original teachings in most spiritual traditions and religions are just completely not what they were originally there for. Buddhism, what I've found is what happens is a lot of people get into that because of their trauma, and they attach to something that means that they just become self-isolated and separate, completely separate from the world. And so everything's karma and dharma. So let's say you're all getting bashed by someone, and I'm just like, that's just Elle's karma, or that's her dharma. And I don't do anything about it, because there's no situation in the world ever to get angry. I literally heard that out of the mouth of a guy who spent 30 years in meditation teaching Buddhism and Dharma. And I'm like, that's a complete, I believe, I'm not going to say I know the truth, but I believe that's a complete separation from the realities of life. So that's what I'm not suggesting we do. So when you say, should you get in your own bubble and unplug? For me, unplugging isn't unplugging from everybody else and everything that goes on. It's unplugging from what's real and what's not real. And I'm just not interested in what's not real. I'm very plugged into the what's real.
Yes.
So then when you said that, I'm like, we got to give more context or a definition. So I would absolutely stop somebody from harming you. That's part of my role here on earth as a man. If there's a woman that's been... But there's a caveat to that, which is like, well, there's not really. But just to use an example, this is not a reality situation. What if you had just done something really nasty to somebody outside that I haven't seen? Now they've come in to take it out because you've just harmed their kid, and they have no other way to vent that anger than to harm you physically. So now I beat the crap out of them to save you. Have I really done something right, or have I done something wrong? I'm not saying there's a right answer. I'm just saying that's a question, because I don't know
the truth.
I don't know the truth. I don't know what made that situation. But the quote is a good one. I agree with it, but then there's a whole other bigger picture to that as well. Because I see evil as just a representation, a reflection, or a symptom of how out of balance we are. Because I don't think that there's any such thing as all good or all bad. I think the yin-yang, or the day-night, the duality of this realm is very, very simple as a natural law. It's the way electromagnetism works. You need your polarities, positive and negative, for it to function, for this realm to be here. So then if it appears that there's an excess of evil, my question then is like, why is it? why is there an excess of evil? And what really brings that back into balance? Because fighting it, I've found, doesn't actually bring it out of balance. It actually brings it more out of balance. It doesn't bring it back into balance. So then the question becomes, what can we really do? What gives a real result? What balances the universe out more than just getting your very emotive, which is like electricity emotion, which is probably giving charge to that thing? What actually brings the results? And this is really difficult for people to get their heads around, because I was definitely one of those people who was fighting stuff. I was very rebellious, very against things, because I was like, there's an injustice there. It's not fair. And that's exactly what I thought about the system, that we call it, as I was fighting it, until I realized it was actually really fair. Now I don't fight the system anymore. A, I'm creating my own systems. And B, it's like I see how it works, and I just have to. But that doesn't mean that I will stand for an injustice as well. So
that's a good clarity that needs to be.
Yeah.
Because you've had that question before, haven't you?
Yeah, it comes up. It comes up because, but what's really difficult for people to hear, which especially in the moment, it's very difficult to hear, is your polarity with it accurate? Because I always, from what I've seen in my own experiences, I've found that when somebody has a major polarity to something, they're not in balance. If they're not in balance, what they're saying isn't true. It's very one-sided, or it's a skewed perception of what's really going on. Your father, for example, probably doesn't know what a court is. Probably doesn't know what the systems are that leads to that, or how they operate. Probably doesn't know Julian's backstory, for example, or anything. And I'm not saying I know it, but I've just seen enough in the world to know that what you see in the media is not what's really going on.
No, of course not.
If they want to push the Assange story, I ask why. You know, why? Why will it go quiet at some times? Why will it raise up at some times? Because I've been in the world long enough and gone deep enough to realize that nothing happens for no reason. On that world stage, it's all about what's hiding what's really going on, or it's alluding to something else, sleight of hand.
Yeah.
So if I was talking about Assange, it would sound something, I mean, I'm acting now, but it would be like, So there's this guy that appears to be looking at jail time for something that he most likely didn't do. I'd be like, what could really be done to help him? What could really be done to serve justice here? That's how I would articulate that. But if I was like, it's an injustice and we've got to get him out, this means I'm like, why is my voice like that? What do I feel why do I feel I'm under threat? And I'm just projecting it onto this persona that is Julian Assange. As an example, anything, COVID or masks or, kids somewhere apparently starving that may not be starving.
You don't think just empathy, or, for example, my dad's situation, he's been, quite a well-renowned documentary maker his whole life and a journalist. He's been filming in all sorts of scenarios in Vietnam, whatever. So I guess for him, he just, as an 84-year-old, he just knows the imbalance in the world. And he's probably lived long enough to see that evil is continuously being out of balance. To speak about it without any attachment, it's kind of like...
I'm not saying people speak about it without attachment. What I'm suggesting is that the attachment won't serve it. This is the paradox of things, is that the attachment is what will prevent a result happening. And most people get angry. For example, let's take people in the kind of community that follow my stuff. They're angry about the government. They're angry about the skies. And my question is, does your anger at that, just pointing at it and saying that shouldn't
change
be,
anything?
Does that change it, or does it feed it? And the answer is it feeds it.
Yeah.
So what most people get angry about is things that they don't know how to actually change. Yes. Whereas I think in my experiences, in what I've seen before my eyes and other people have witnessed too, I have changed systems. I've changed what happens in the local community. I changed what happened with people, with how they would deal with an affront from police or council or something. I have actually made that change. And I was able to make that change because I was able to look at it and go, well, okay, that's an injustice, and here's what we can do about it.
Yeah.
And it's just straight down the middle. There's no question. There's no fighting. It's straight down the middle. Yeah. So when I see people that are on either side of the middle, I'm like, that's just going to feed it. You're just pissing and moaning and not getting a result. So that's the difference. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do anything. I'm saying that you should center yourself before you do something, and only when you center yourself will you get it. The other thing, just definitely not arguing anybody's experience, But I can give you plenty of examples of people who are documentary filmmakers who are they're dead set about things to do with the earth and what it is and where there's ice melting and not. And I'm like, you went in, because I'm in film, right? So I also know that a lot of it isn't just like you've got a narrative already in mind. And we can be very, like, we're exposed to so much more information than we actually take in. So until you've managed to open yourself up to the other kinds of information, you don't know that what you're seeing is what's really happening. You don't know that that's a very controlled thing. You can't argue about seeing that there is a child being harmed in the street. That's definitely happening. But why it's happening, or like the extent of it, you actually don't know. And most people don't. Like, I've been in that industry for a while too, not as long as your father, but I've been in it enough to see from the perspective that I had going into it from my previous experiences about the educational system, about the banking system, about the legal and all those medical systems. I saw through those before I got into filmmaking, and that opened my eyes again to how we can be. For example, I know people who've been literally in the households of Bushes and Kennedys and that sort of thing. Now, if you know enough about the lineage and what they do, and you can actually decipher what they're really saying, you know that they are in a certain camp. But these people are like, no, you've got it wrong. You don't know because you're only just seeing it from Australia. I lived in their house. I was their friend. I had dinner with them. And they couldn't see what was right in front of their eyes. So they assume that they're right. So, and again, I don't argue anybody's experience, and people don't like this because nobody likes, a lot of people just don't like being questioned, but I don't take somebody's position as in I'm this highly qualified, or I'm 80 years old and I've been in this industry for 40 years. That all goes by me. That's irrelevant information. And this is the discernment. This is the ability to laser in on what's really being said and why. What was the real experience? And
but how do you handle being defeated? Because in some sense, my dad's passion comes from a lifetime of many defeats, right? And wanting the best for people in his community and whatever. And you yourself last night said you're an angry person. So does that anger infiltrate when you are making change and you get defeated?
The anger, so this is an important topic too, because I got told by this 30-year veteran of meditation, there is no place for anger ever. And I'm like, that's
not true.
There's always so anger can transmute. It's very powerful, especially righteous anger. But anger that you hold and boils inside of you will only ever defeat you. So if the anger is used right and it's used to transmute and it doesn't linger, it's a beautiful thing. But when anger is just, I'm angry at the world, this is right, this is not right, but you're not doing anything about it, you're not using it to transmute, it will actually just destroy you as an individual. And it can very badly affect your efforts to change something as well, because it can really skew it. You don't get clarity. Like that story I told about, because I get angry all the time. Like, I'm a very angry guy, actually. And I smashed that ladder with the hammer that I was standing on. That was dumb. That's no clarity of thought, no centered self to do something like that. Because that was really dumb, especially next to a broken window too. I could have died. But that's what I did. So that's an example of how anger is not a good thing. But a lot of what's got me to where I am was from anger, but I learned how to channel that anger. That's the difference. So, and I wasn't, I think I just said, I don't think I said he was an angry guy. I said that I could hear the anger, and that it was maybe clouding some of the judgment. And it's hard. And I'm not saying that anybody should let it go, because it's one of those new age, weird, just not right things to, if you are angry about something, don't just listen to somebody say, you should never be angry. Just let it go. It doesn't matter. It's like, but it does matter. Some things do matter.
Yes.
Like if I came across some of the doctors and dentists that poisoned me when I was a kid, I haven't let that go. I'd love to scoop their brains out and just eat it and just, you know what I mean? Like, I haven't let it go.
Yeah.
But it helps, but I channel that to help stop that happening to other kids.
Yeah.
So it's transmutable. That's the thing. But look, I just think it's a huge topic. And with something that's happening on the other side of the world or somewhere that you're not around, you've just got to ask yourself, like, how does this happen? It's not about doing nothing either. There's a lot of paradoxes to that as well, obviously, which is like, that's why these topics can go for ages to talk about. But it's definitely not about sitting back and doing nothing, because I do see people do that.
Yeah.
They take a back seat. They just go, well, I can't do anything about
Which
it,
is wrong.
so I won't. I'm going to the beach. And it's, yeah, anyway. So you
Anyway.
can take that any way you want to go.
Let's jump across to another topic you brought up last night that I would like you to unpack. You were speaking about how women are attracted to heroic men. And you said when men, you know, go through that hero's journey of some sort, or they come into themselves, that spiritual center, the physical center and everything. And you said, and then there's a protection bubble that happens from the masculinity, and women can go about to do their thing because right now, I don't know what's happening, but the thing is not happening. Can you elaborate the roles of men and women from your perspective? I would really like
Yeah,
to
sure.
know.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for women. I don't think I know the role of women, but
Not the role, but in relationship. You're a man, you've been in a relationship, just
Yeah.
like what you were talking
so
about
for
last
me, it's
night.
like it's very simple. A man's role is to provide and protect. I really feel like it's a woman will lead in the spiritual aspect. Like she's more tapped into she's more of an oracle, and she can lead a man. But then that's like the impetus. But then the man leads in the physical. The man provides the framework. He provides and protects in the physical, and she provides and protects in the spirit realm to a degree. So that for a man, it's like a man needs to provide the structure, and a man provides structure by planting himself in the world to be known. He's puts his will into the world. He stands on his own 2 feet, and by that he is known. He's known by his deeds in action. So women, who I love, don't have any honor, and that's not putting women down. But for women, it's totally okay to say they'll do something and then not do it or change their mind about stuff because it's the way women are wired. Men have honor. Men have to. It's a code where a man has to. His word is law. What he says, he must do. He can't change his mind. It's like a whole different thing. Doesn't mean women suck if they don't do that. It's just we're wired differently. So it's like this whole thing about it's toxic masculinity or everything's gay and everything's just everything. You just change your gender, chop this off, and you're brave and whatever. Like all that stuff is designed to prevent that happening, to prevent the masculine from providing that framework. Because when the masculine doesn't do it, then the only framework that's available is that of the system, that of the entity world and whatever. So the masculine, to me, the way I see it is that the man provides that structure and the man holds that structure. So not only does he build it, but he holds it. Same as establishing and holding a position, which is quite a masculine thing to do, I guess. So when I talk about these things, I actually don't know what it's like to be a woman to do that. But maybe women don't have to know how to establish and hold a position because the men are supposed to do it. And they give them their spiritual strength to be able to continue to do that. Maybe that. So then that's what I think that men do. And to like really, really be strong in their intentions and to be clear about that sort of stuff. And then for a woman, I think it's just it's to support and guide that. Because we're supposed to be a team, you know, we're supposed to work together like that, you know, and of course we both have masculine and feminine sides. So it's important to balance those because until you can balance that in yourself, you can't have really good relationships with others, for example. Does that answer the question or not?
Yeah, I just want to talk about something you don't usually talk about. And I think it's quite important. We're all in relationships, you know, and I find it really interesting. There's always this line that I hear guys say, she's always trying to change me. You hear guys say that all the time, you know? What do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, that's the classic thing is guys just meet a girl and just go, I never wanted to change.
Yeah.
And girls meet a guy and just go, he's got to. So, yeah.
Because I have an answer for it, but I want to hear what you think.
Well, from a guy's perspective, I think that this kind of then gets into like, what's the purpose of being with a woman as a man? What's the purpose of being with a woman? For a lot of guys, it's regular sex or getting your dinner cooked for you or something like that. It's like some kind of like very base level reason. Nurturing, attention, affection. I've got a girl on my arm if I go out and she looks good. That's what a lot of guys, that's why they're into this like hookup culture and stuff. And that's only ever going to leech a man's jing or his energy. Whether he's ejaculating or not, it's his energy, his essence is leaky. It's going everywhere. And it's not defined. It's not confined and therefore it's not defined. It doesn't define him. So then when a man moves out of that and he's like, what do I really need in a woman? What a man really needs is he needs to grow. He needs to find himself through that woman. She needs to be able to bring him in and not take his childlike boyishness and help him become the full essence of a man. which a woman really can do. But she's also got to be embodied properly in her feminine to allow that to happen. She can't be some narcissistic, bitchy, whiny thing. That's not going to help him bring in that. This literally just came to me while I was talking to a mate, and I just pointed to my back without really knowing what I was doing. He was talking about this girl that I've just, she's just, anyway, I won't say who because I don't want to give too many clues, but she's taken a educational role in my life, and she's very beautiful. And he was kind of going, is there anything potential happening there? And I'm like, no, it's like, that's not part of my, I don't do that. I don't leak my energy towards things like that is not going to lead to procreation in my life purpose. Just the beauty is a distraction from who I am and my purpose, for example. And I pointed like this. I'm like, I don't need a girl to have sex with or cook for me or anything like that. I pointed like this. I went, I'll know when a girl's like comes like this, she's behind me and she comes out and through me like that. That's what I'm waiting for, not breasts and long, pretty hair, which is what most guys, because I was like that. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's part of being a man, but it's like everything, every situation, every challenge, we have what's called, I talk about it in terms of music and octaves and frequencies. So if you play like a note A on a guitar, it is an A, but there's also the several lower harmonics and several upper harmonics of the same note value. And it's like, as a man, you can choose, and it's always a choice. You can choose to operate in those lower harmonics, which is like breasts, bums, dinners, sex, whatever, right? But then you can choose the upper harmonics as well, which is like, what is the highest potential that I can achieve as a man in this life, and what I'm creating here, what passion and purpose I'm putting into the world, and how I'm reauthoring this place, this realm, because it's very malleable to us. And then what is the purpose of a woman in that role as well? And it doesn't mean you don't have sex with your partner or anything like that. I'm not saying that either, but everything you do reaches that higher octave as opposed to it being lower, which is where you'll also find all that conflict. But it's challenging. Like, you've got to get like that, things have got to die off.
Break down.
Yeah, which is your bullshit, which everybody has. Every man has that. So it's like, are you willing to allow that to happen? If you trust in her spirit that she's only there to guide you to there, as opposed to just draw, because there are women that just want to leech from men.
Of course.
So it's like learning to discern. That's the other thing.
Yep.
So it's a lot of different elements to this, but all of it comes down to knowing the self. You can't discern what kind of woman this is if you're not getting to know yourself. So instead of getting angry at her, you'd be like, damn, like I didn't gauge that at all. My discernment is way off. Thank you, bitchy lady who just tried to take all my belongings or whatever. It's like, you just taught me that I'm not there yet. I've got to be more diligent. I've got to get to know myself more, as opposed to she's the enemy. It's like, no, you can only have a point at the enemy in the mirror. It's like, it's you. So these things are all beautiful things.
So how do we make, you're a unique guy. You want to grow. That curiosity is already there. And how does society get men into a position where they are curious to grow with a woman? Because I think that's where this line, oh, she's trying to change me, is coming from a place of, I don't want to grow, right? So what would your advice be for men to just get to a position of be like, hey, I want to grow and it's not going to hurt my ego to be with a woman that can have that initiatory womb power? Because I looked at this statistic the other day, and it was in the self-help industry, 80% are women, which is crazy. I feel like, why
80% of women what?
In the self-help industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, 80% are women. It's only 20% guys. So that already shows about the curiosity of growth. What would you advise to men to get into that stage of curiosity about growth?
Well, I'd probably stay out of the self-help industry. I think that's a very toxic one.
I know, but when people are just starting out, they get drawn there first,
Again, it's like, it's hard for me to say because my journey has been quite unique, and I know that I was also born a certain way. I have a certain cosmology, I have a certain chart, I have a certain type, a certain constitution that gives me a strong will, that gives me the ability to question. I didn't have to learn that. So I get that, and I know it's not everyone's path to be like that, and we're not supposed to be. No one's supposed to do what I do. It's just kind of like, you can learn from or gain like an insight from my experience, but you're not supposed to emulate me, and I'm not better than anyone, or I'm not there yet or anything like that either. I'm just as crap as everyone else. But also, you know, crap is a relative. I don't mean we're shit people. I just mean we all have our crap. So I guess all I can do is share what led me to be able to want that. And part of it was the ability or the willingness to be humbled and the willingness to take losses. So for a man, like the man is ruled by his ego to probably for his whole life, but at least very strongly until the point where you get to realize what it is and choose not to be ruled by it anymore. And that requires a defeat. That requires a death. It requires, willing to be humbled. And I got that through, going out to deal with police and magistrates and dealing with women, for example. You take defeats there, or dealing with, like martial arts is a great example. You can't lie to yourself on the mat, on the wrestling mat. Like, you're either winning or you're not. And it's really important to learn humility, to learn that you can't win all the battles, kind of thing. So then it's just, you kind of summed it up though. It's just the willingness. You're either going to choose it or you're not. You can't pretend though either, because a lot of guys do that. They pretend that they want to change, but really they don't. And it's reflected back in the way you live your life. Like a lot of guys, they pretend they want to, I don't know, go and work out more, but they don't really, because they're sitting on the couch. So the body doesn't lie, and neither do your actions. And this is the important thing, is just to know really, maybe it could just come down to a code for men, because men do kind of require a code, or an honorable or a warrior's code, which is that your word will be law. You will be known by your deeds in action. These are all from the Bible, for example. Because we miss the rite of passage in our culture that most men all men are supposed to have, maybe take inspiration from other cultures that had it, like samurai warriors, for example. I think that they had a great set of codes of conduct. They were fierce warriors. They had no fear. But when they weren't on the battlefield or training for battle, they might be making pottery or sewing, doing like girly, feminine things. But these are some of the strongest warriors. So it's like, can you balance that? When I was growing up, you just didn't want to be called gay about anything. So that would affect the colors of clothing you wore, the types of things you would say or not say, because there was this stigma about being too effeminate. So I was cut off from my feminine side for the whole, at least first half of my life. And so learning how to balance that is really important. But then that requires being guided a little as well, because otherwise it can be very destructive. So it's weird. It's not a simple answer at all. I think the way society is structured is definitely designed to keep men from balancing themselves out, and women. So as the man, I think the man's got to be the one that just goes, all right, well, someone's got to do it, so I'm going to do it. And then like give the inspiration to the women to do the same, for example, rather than waiting for them. Because I hear guys say that. They're like, there's no good women around. They're all like weird and retarded and stuff. And I'm like, well.
And we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, are they though? Or is it just like, So, because my friends, like, they're all amazing, like, especially the women, they're all amazing. So it's kind of, it's not like that. It's not like everybody's not good. Well, and this is the thing, I'll just say this because this applies to every single thing that I talk about. I talk about resonance, and this can apply to the masculine, the feminine, dynamics between relationships, legal stuff, the environment, everything. And what I say is that there is a natural resonance to things that I've seen. But what I see is that we're off. We're off just by a certain degree. And that's related, for example, even just a simple example is the calendar. Like there's 13 months in a year, 13 28-day cycles, but that got infiltrated and bastardized down to the 12-month cycle. It's off the natural rhythm. And when we do everything in that, we're off. We're just off of nature. But the thing is that the difference between resonance or harmony and disharmony is like, it's tiny. The analogy or the way I illustrate it, usually when I've got one with me, is those holographic pictures where if you look at it that way, it looks like crud being smeared on someone's face, and you turn it 0.5 millimeter that way and it's like rainbows and butterflies. You turn it that way again and it's shit on your face. That way, rainbows and butterflies. And that's the analogy. Like we're not eons off. It's right there.
So subtle and
it's
slight.
so subtle. It's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. And when you just want to reharmonize because you want to, it's like, it's just that. It's just this slight shift, and then everything just like clicks in and changes. And so it's not this huge task that we've got ahead. I don't think anyway. Like, you go to other towns and that, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Let's talk about language here, because that's one of the biggest things you're saying of where we're off balance. And I really like how you bring attention to words with people. One of the biggest things you always say, understanding. Do you really want to be standing underneath someone when you are comprehending what they're saying? And you've started using this word saying inner standing, and that's really cool, because if that actually gets far, that'll have a potential to change and last. And I did a little bit of looking into it. I speak Russian, and in Russian you say понимать, which means to grasp. So English tends to have many words like this, where there's a word that it could be pure, and you break it down and it becomes impure, because we could just be saying, oh, I got it. Oh, okay, I got it, which we do have. But then there's this understand. But then on the flip side, there's some cool ones that you can break down, like responsibility, like your ability to respond. That's not so bad. But there is a lot of what you say spells, but we don't get too attached to like, oh, I'm never going to say that word. But just share a little bit more on your insight with that.
Yeah, well, so English is, to my understanding, I could be off, but my understanding is that it's the last language developed by the legal profession. And it's amalgamated from various other previous languages like Latin and Roman, and there's other influences there. Then English was the last one that was developed purely by the legal profession, which means it's the most heavily coded. It's the greatest number of spells are put through the English language. Because we babble, this is the thing. If we babble and we don't know what we're saying, then by our own agreement, we're just like, well, we're idiots. We're wards of the state. We can't possibly fend for ourselves, so you guys should do it for us. That's the implied agreement. And when it's implied, because we follow that script, then we operate as slaves and babbling idiots, and therefore we can't complain when somebody else is taking the responsibility for us, telling us what to do and what we can and can't do. How to trade, how to do business. Whereas other languages that have their roots much, much further back, they don't have that.
With a more pure intent.
Way more pure intent, yeah. And so but the thing, this is the weird thing about it all, is that, well, not the weird thing, the beautiful thing, because with any challenge, like I say, is the opportunity to transmute that into a gift. So if English is the most heavily bastardized, coded, spell-written language, if you can learn to use that or master it, then you learn how to cast the greatest spells. You can, because it works both ways. And so what that means is, like, imagine you're a boxer. A boxer will stand with their guard like right up by their face. You can't get through that guard. As soon as a boxer throws a punch to try to strike the other, that's when they leave themselves open for something else. So when you put that much effort into something, yes, it has the potential to repress people very, very well, but you also leave yourself open to the exact same amount of flip side that can come back on you, which is why often our biggest challenges can be our greatest paths to freedom. And I think the English language is the same. I think if we get to figure out what these spells are, we learn how to cast spells of our own and completely reimagine this whole realm and our lives. And so I just see, like I say, I grew up, as soon as you find out about it, you're angry about it. You're like, this stupid language. I didn't know I've been giving my rights away this whole time by how I'm speaking. But then it's like, no, wait, but I can then reauthor that. And now I'm the authority, which is cool. I don't think other languages have the same ability to do that, to bring you to that place of authorship.
Well, if it's been so bastardized, it's like, well, we can change it too. If it's been so changed and manipulated.
I do. I make words up all the time.
Exactly. Thrown it around, and it doesn't feel sacred. I have this beautiful access to the Russian language and how deep that culture is. And before Russian, so it's Cyrillic letters, but there was the lands of Hyperborea up there, and that's where the alphabet came from and then became the Russian language. And literally the alphabet could be on one square, and I think it's 37, and every way that you read made words of divinity, and every symbol had meaning within one word. And it's an activation just looking at the alphabet, and we don't even have that. Like in Russian, semya is family, which means 7 meat. And so there's all these hidden beautiful activations, and it's like, if we could make English as boss as that, it would be
Well, it does. It's just
Amazing.
not as like Sanskrit's like that as well.
Yes.
Sanskrit, there's various older languages.
Of course,
that
I'm
have
not
that.
just saying that. It's just what I know
No,
about
no, I
that
just mean
one.
like there's many of them, and that's
Yes.
the way it's meant to be.
Yes.
And this is the thing, like we have to learn all the meanings of words in English, right? But my contention with words having meaning or inherent meaning is that you should be able to look at it and receive the information about what that means really in some way, some activation, right? But we don't. In English, we have to learn the meanings of every word. And there are several words that phonetically are exactly the same, but there's 4 different meanings and 4 different spellings of that word. And other languages are kind of similar like that, but not to that degree, not the way that you can really get things wrong like you can in English. But then, for example, some people were asking, or one girl last night asked about what we can do about the chemicals being sprayed in the sky. So I gave her, there's the FOI, there's the notice of liability, there's a few different things. But I'm working on a presentation to do at my space soon, which is going to be called The Weather Within, because there's also this ability to influence the elements when we tap back into what our power is. And it's interesting because some of the language you're talking about, that's like it has inherent activation embedded in it and it's not hidden. English has it, but it's hidden. It's like hidden in plain sight. So it's kind of like, for example, the word weather. When I was looking at that word, I'm like, that's we. And then it's like one letter off from ether. But when you, because English does that, it'll flip words around to mean that it's usually got something to do with electricity or electromagnetism. And then that does, weather is we ether. And it's like, we are the weather. The weather within will be. So I'm like, that's huge because that's hidden in plain sight but alluding to the power that we have. But it doesn't activate you just by looking at it. You have to decode it. And that's one of the main differences is English is a very heady thing. It's not an embodied thing. Yeah, you can embody it, but you have to get there. It's like, which I don't particularly like. I like things that are more pure of intent. Yeah, but this is the thing. I was born into this timeline, into a white English speaking, country and all that. So it's my job, I feel, to start to decode that. That's part of my role here. Other people, that's not their role. This is the thing. Like some people feel they were born into like hell. They're like, I didn't choose this and this sucks. Why would I be born into this family or in these situations? Why would this happen to kids? That's not right. Why would God allow people to suffer and all that kind of thing? But when you realize that it's like on some level chosen and it's a blessing and there's a reason you're here, like even the last 3 years, that was something we're all supposed to go through. Like, why? Like, we're chosen for it. That's the thing. It's like, as soon as you can embrace that, it's all exciting. It's all awesome. And you get these activations. But while you're resisting everything, it's just everything's crap. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, I think English I went through the stage of just hating the language. But then I'm like, wow, there's actually this massive gift in here and I've got a path here, which makes it fun.
Thanks for sharing that. I think to wrap up, let's just talk about what you thought about last night. It's your first time in Bellingen. I don't know if I already mentioned it, but 140 people, whatever. How did you?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. Like I say, I was expecting about 30. I don't know why, but then it was packed out and the energy, because a part of doing a talk is you've got to read the room. And sometimes it's difficult because before, like some people turned up early, right? And there was an elderly lady there and I was kind of like, the way she was talking to me, she was really direct and nice, but I was like, how's she going to handle some of the concepts? And then, so you have to read the room, and really kind of feel who's there. And the energy in the room felt really, really positive. And it felt different to people on the Gold Coast, felt different to people in Byron. Like it's got its own feel. And I really, really enjoyed it. And the faces of people afterwards, when they came up to say hello, it's like, there's a certain resonance here that's very strong and it's quite appealing. Obviously, that's why people end up here. The support, it felt very supportive in return, as in the way what people were giving back from the audience during the talk. And it was, and especially the girl, I actually can't remember her name, I feel bad about it. I think it was Millie, this young girl, she made this for me and gave it to me and she put it on my wrist for me and she told me exactly who she was, exactly what she stands for and everything. I'm just like, that was the highlight for me was that. And it just shows what's coming through. And that is like so empowering and inspiring for me to see that coming through the next generations, because I'm pretty well aware, because I knew it when I was a kid, that you well, anyway, generally speaking, you get these new phases come through where the newer generations are more advanced than the ones before them. And I think we fall into the trap of being like, I'm older than you, I know best, this is how it's done, you do it this way, and if you don't, you're wrong or bad or whatever. But I think we're here, same as the masculine dynamic, to guide and nurture the younger ones coming through, but realistically, they're here to teach us. So as long as we don't like put them down in that, like they're not here to tell us what to do, they're too young to know what to do. We're here to guide them to make sure that they can flourish, and in return, they're going to teach us. And I see that in some of the youth around, and it's really, really empowering.
Absolutely. Did you get blown away when people come up to you afterwards and just, there was a line there at one point.
Yeah.
You got flowers given to you.
Yeah. It was
Does
great.
it still make you go, wow, what is this?
Yeah, I just take it for what it is. I just try to like distance myself from it, like being anything or meaning anything.
Yeah.
Because, you know, prior to the whole COVID thing, I was the guy behind the camera and that.
Yeah.
I was producing everyone else's stuff, and I like that. I like going everywhere as a ghost. No one cares, no one pays any attention. I like that. But then, you know, like life has other plans, and so it's kind of like I don't relish it, and I don't push it away. It just is what it is.
Do you actively keep your ego in check?
Yes. Yeah. Because, well, inherently, I'm also quite, I'm very introverted, and I'm a bit like, even from last night, you know, people said it was great. But when I'm going to sleep, I'm like, oh, I missed this. That was an opportunity I missed. I shouldn't have said that for that long. I missed saying, like, I'm quite hard on myself for things, but I know that I can do better. So I never actually think I've done anything really good, but I'm just appreciative of the, it's just an energy exchange. It's not whether I did good or bad, and therefore there doesn't have to be ego in it or anything like that. And yeah, like I realize that there's only certain people get chosen to do a role like that people actually want to hear speak about something and can improve their life as a result. But it also doesn't mean I'm better than anyone else. Like I really, really know that. Like I grew up knowing that. I think it's a personality type as well. Some people just inherently get that. But I was always really put off by friends and family. For example, if we went anywhere in the service industry, no matter where it was, a hotel or restaurants or whatever, and I would notice how my friends sometimes, we'd be conversing and someone would come up to put like forks down or something, and they wouldn't even break. It's like they don't even acknowledge, but I can't not acknowledge someone. Oh, thanks. Like I can't not acknowledge someone for being there. And they'd be like, oh, it's just the waiter. I'm like, it's not just the waiter. That's this guy or a girl, same as you. It's like, how can you not? Like I've never been able to separate, you know, like better or worse or like higher up the social structure or lower down. It's like everyone to me is the same. And so I've never been, I just guess that keeps me in check too. I'm never like, oh, I'm the guy that speaks. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I always feel like I used to feel not even worthy of doing that. I'm very much embracing, like, I don't feel not worthy anymore, but I also don't feel like it's any great thing. So just the energy exchange is the most important thing. Like, so for example, you know, a lot of people donated money, which is great because this was my favorite thing, but that's not going to pay for my ride home. So it's like, it's great that I got a few other, like one lady gave me flowers, one lady gave me some tea that she made. Like those things actually mean way more. Like this means the most, and just people saying thanks, and you can genuinely see that it's affected them positively. But I also know that I didn't do it. I think that's the main thing. And as a practitioner, I knew, and I made people know it. If they tried to pedestal me, I unpedestaled myself straight away because I knew I didn't do anything. I didn't heal anyone. I didn't change their life in that talk last night. All that they saw was something that was already there. I just reminded them of something, and that's not a great skill. It's like, remember to bring the headphones when you come in. It's like, yeah, you give Tom a clap. That was so amazing. It's like, it's not amazing. I just reminded you to bring the headphones. And like last night, for whatever inspiration people got, it was just a remembering of what they already actually inherently kind of get, but maybe didn't join two dots. Yeah. And that's nothing. Joining two dots with someone's nothing. So that's kind of like how I see it. I don't see it as something that's, you know, grand.
And it very much felt like that in the room. Everyone was super present and coming into themselves in a really deep sense, going, oh, I remember this, so I know this. This is resonating deeply. Well, thank you so much for having this epic long chat with me. It's been really, really good. And yeah, I look forward to you coming back to Bellinger.
Yeah, I'll be back. We'll do some workshops. We'll do another show.
Definitely. It'll be great. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Elle.